Hello everybody, it's the Historical Gamer once again, and today I wanted to take a moment to quickly wish you all a Happy New Year. I know it's January 5th already, but this is the first video that I've actually recorded since the new year, so I hope you guys all had a great holiday, and I hope you also had a great new year, and everything is going well for you. Now, in today's video, we're going to be talking about my top 5 most anticipated strategy games of 2020. In one of our more recent videos, we talked about the top 5 strategy games of last year, that being 2019. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about some games that I'm really excited about, that I'm hoping anyway are coming out this year. Now, before we get into the list, I did want to take a quick moment to say we're also going to have a brief section at the start of this video that talks about some anticipated games that I've already talked about previously. So every year when I do these lists, there's usually 1 or 2 games that I talk about that I think is coming out in a given year, but it doesn't actually come out. That doesn't mean I'm not excited about them anymore, though. In fact, all of the games that I'm going to be talking about have shown serious progress and do appear to be ready to launch in 2020. Several of them already have either target seasons or target quarters or target months. So I did want to go ahead and talk about a couple of games that I've talked about previously. I'm not putting them on my top 5 list, not because they're not in the top 5, just because I don't like to do, one of these games would have been on the list the last 2 years. I originally talked about in 2018, didn't come out then, didn't come out in 2019. And so I wouldn't want to hold a game over on my list for 3 straight years, kind of displacing another new game that had been announced in a follow-on year. So I'm going to talk about these games briefly, and then we'll jump into my top 5 list of 2020, and let's just get going. So the first game that I'm going to be talking about here on the honorable list of most anticipated games of 2020 is also the game that's been on the list the longest, and it's a game that I think back in 2018 I did an interview with the developer for our Single Malt Strategy podcast, and that game is Burden of Command by Green Tree Games. And this is a tactical World War II game that puts you in the shoes of a company commander in World War II. So you're in charge of a company. It's a unit called the Cotton Balers. And you are tasked with leading this company through 18 different battles, or 18 different turn-based tactical battles. As a company commander, you are given a wide variety of choices of how to approach leading your men through these different scenarios. And you basically have to make decisions about life and death of your soldiers, right? So you've got 18 battles. You're going to be getting orders and objectives throughout those battles. And you have to make decisions about how you want to approach those orders. You could launch frontal assaults and overrun the enemy positions and take these objectives, but if you do that and you throw away your men's lives, that might cause you to lose the trust of your men. This is a game that's really trying to peel back the layer of tactical World War II or tactical war games in general to say, listen, it's not just pixels, it's not just points on a map, it's not just objectives, it's about the men you're leading. And so you get a chance to learn a little bit about your soldiers. You get a chance to learn about, their families, their history, their past. You have to make key decisions about, are you going to have a lieutenant, lead from the front? Is that going to get the lieutenant killed? Are your men going to trust you? Might they actually disobey your orders if they don't think that you're looking out for them? All of these different kind of things that you have to factor in. I'm kind of reminded of the Band of Brothers episode near the end of the series where the company is given, or a platoon is given, orders to cross a river to capture German prisoners of war, and everybody knows the war is, coming to a close. Everybody knows the war is going to be an Allied victory, and yet they're given these orders. And so they follow them, and they lose casualties. And then the very next day, they're given the exact same orders. And their lieutenant's kind of like, yeah, we're not going to do that again. I'm just going to lie to headquarters and say we did this. And I'm kind of curious if those are the kind of decisions that you're going to get, or if you want to be a butcher and you want to get your men out there, might they frag you? I don't know. But that's the concept of this game, is to really tell a human story while you're also fighting a game of a tactical turn-based battle. And that's, I think, the real appeal of this, is to tell a human story, to try and really tell the story of the fact that, listen, when you're in charge of soldiers in combat, it's not just this arbitrary take a point on a map. These are human beings that you're leading, that you're responsible for, and there really is a burden placed on you, the leader, to be responsible for them. Not just to follow your orders, but also to look out for your men or not, and what are the consequences of that. So that's an interesting game that I believe will be coming out this year. I hope it'll be coming out this year. It's called Burden of Command by Green Tree Games, and the link is in the description if you want to check out their Steam page to learn a little bit more. Our second honorable mention game is a game called Grand Tactician, The Civil War, 1861 to 1865. It is being developed and published by Oliver Keppelmuller. It is slated to come out in the summer of 2020, and this is a Civil War strategic and tactical war game like I don't think we've ever really seen before. This is a game that is going to be charging you with either fighting the war as the Confederacy or as the Union, and it's going to put you in charge of the Union and Confederate armies from a grand strategic level. So you have to raise troops, you have to deal with logistics, you have to move your troops across a strategic map, much as in games like AJOD Civil War II or other games like that. But in addition to that, there is also going to be a tactical layer. So perhaps somewhat like in Total War, where you move units around a strategic map, and then when two units collide, you get a tactical battle. And so this is going to be a game that allows you to fight battles out tactically while also strategically leading the war. And it requires you to, set up your armies, and this is just some of the stuff from the Steam page. It says, build and manage the flow of supplies to your armies, utilize and expand railways, lines of supply to move armies across the map. Fight pivotal battles that can last days on historical battlefields. Manage hundreds of historical commanders with personal attributes and specializations. Huge armies of infantry, cavalry, and artillery are at your disposal with realistic command structures and historical order of battle. And you bring the Civil War to life. Amazing Civil War reenactment and combat footage from Lionheart Filmworks. So there seems to be an element of this game where you've got the strategic layer where you've got to manage the blockade. You need to lay sieges. You need to move across the map of the United States. But then you've got the tactical layer of fighting the battles. And presumably when you fight the battles, they've partnered with this film studio called Lionheart Filmworks to use some reenactment footage to add a little bit of flavor to the game. That reminds me a little bit of Civil War Generals 2, which did a lot of that. But this is, I haven't seen any actual gameplay. I've seen some screenshots. It looks really interesting. I don't think I've ever seen a game, at least not in a long time, that really lets you get a true sense of the depth and the complexity of the strategic layer of the Civil War while also letting you fight out the tactical battles. And the tactical screenshots look pretty impressive. It appears to be, I believe, in real time. It's not, incredibly high resolution 3D graphics, but it's definitely kind of, I would say, a step up of a little bit more detail than what you see in Ultimate General Civil War, while also at the same time being something that does appear to have a pretty complex strategic layer as well. Some of the screenshots that I've seen on there almost remind me a little bit of like some of the they had a little screen, not a screenshot, but they had a little graphic that demonstrated how the industry works and how factories and railways and all these other things sort of interface, and it reminded me a little bit of like the Victoria 2 or Victoria 1 pamphlet I had that showed sort of how industry worked and these different flowcharts. So it seems like there's going to be a pretty big amount of complexity both behind the strategic and tactical layer, and I'm pretty excited about that. I don't know a lot else about this game. There's a lot of developer, diaries and blogs or whatever that I haven't looked into in too much detail, but what I've seen so far I'm really impressed about and I'm really excited about. So that's Grand Tactician, The Civil War, and that is coming out in the summer of 2020 is the date they've given. The third honorable mention on my most anticipated list for 2020 is a game that I've actually already played a fair bit on the channel, and that is Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts. And that's a game I'm really excited about. It basically puts you in the charge of a navy during the age of sort of dreadnoughts and just shortly before dreadnoughts, taking place from 1890, about 15 years before the dreadnought, to I think the early 1930s or so is when the game is supposed to end. And basically, it's very similar to Rule the Waves. You're going to be in charge of a navy. You are going to be given a budget. There's going to be arms races and other countries that you're trying to sort of build a better fleet than. You'll have money to build and design ships, destroyers, cruisers, battleships, all these kind of things. You'll need to develop technology to advance your navy and progress it through the age of pre-dreadnoughts and into the age of dreadnoughts. And in the campaign game, you're doing all of this, and then you can fight battles. So, you might be building up your navy, a war might break out, and then you're in charge of actually fighting the fleets. Again, very similar to Rule the Waves. The game is currently on early access. The campaign, which is really all of what I just told you, is not yet out. They only have the sort of challenges, if you will, currently out. So there's like a series of maybe like 20 or so different missions that you can play, which are basically go to the effect of, hey, you've got this much money, here is the objective, maybe you need to destroy an enemy convoy, an enemy battleship, an enemy cruiser, whatever it may be. You've got this much money, go ahead and build this type of ship and see if you can accomplish the challenge or whatnot. And that's what's currently available. The real meat of the game is going to be the campaign, where you have that sort of arms race, that management of an actual navy, and that's the part I'm really excited about, and that's the part where I'm not ready. The reason that this wasn't on a top 5 best games of 2019 is because the campaign isn't out yet. We haven't been able to see what that looks like. But when the campaign game does come out, I will be playing the hell out of it, and it will be all over this channel. And because I'm still waiting to see what that campaign has in store for us, I'm still very, very excited about this game. And this game isn't fully launched yet. It's in early access, and the meat of the game isn't available yet. So until it is, I would still consider this a highly anticipated game, and we'll see, hopefully later this year, what that really looks like. The game is called Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts. It is being developed by Game Labs, the same folks behind Ultimate General Civil War and Ultimate General Gettysburg, and I'm really excited to see what that has in store. I will also just say that they're also working on an Age of Sail game that I didn't include in my list last year, but I am pretty excited about as well, called Ultimate Admiral Age of Sail, which basically takes place in sort of the 7 Years' War to the American Revolution time frame, also into the early Napoleonics. That is very similar to Talonsoft's Age of Sail game from back in the day. No ship design. It's more about following the career of an individual officer in either the U.S. or the British Navy. It allows you to fight single ship action. That allows you to drop troops on the coast to do, marine landings against batteries and other targets ashore, and also has some land combat and sort of the Age of Musketry. So that's another game I'm really excited about. Same developers as Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts, and I guess that would be 4 games then that I've kind of already talked about or showed on the channel that I'm really excited about in 2020. But now with that all being said, let's go ahead and jump into the meat of this video. I know we're already 12 minutes in, but let's actually take a look at this point, having mentioned all of these honorable mention games, what are my 5 most anticipated games that are slated to come out in 2020? My 5 most anticipated strategy games of 2020. At number 5 on my list is a game being developed by Paint Bucket Games and published by Handy Games, and this is a game called Through the Darkest of Times. It is a truly unique game. It is taking place in Berlin in 1933. So the Nazis are rising to power. Nazi Germany is taking shape. The Jews in Germany are beginning to be persecuted against, and that's the backdrop of this game. The concept of the game is that you're the leader of a small resistance group in 1933 in Berlin. Your members of your group are from a wide variety of different persecuted groups by the Nazis. You've got elements of folks who are of the Jewish faith. You have Catholic members in your group. The Germans were very anti-Catholic. There are communists in your group. There's even sort of, I guess, non-persecuted groups of patriots who are unwilling to stand aside and watch as the Nazis rise to power. And so you're leading this small band of folks, of ordinary citizens who are concerned about the rise of Nazi Germany. And so your objective is not to be able to overthrow the Nazis or to stop all of their atrocities, but you're essentially the small resistance band seeing this coming, seeing the Nazis rise to power, and it's telling the story of, folks who probably felt helpless. It's a new angle. It's I'm reading some of this off the Steam page, but they basically say, like, this is, and I think this is 100% true, this is a World War II game you've never seen before. And so apparently it's a game that takes place over 4 chapters. You are attempting to weaken the Nazis. You plan different resistance activities. You find fellow collaborators to try and build up your group. You plan different activities. Maybe you're going to, hand out pamphlets or do whatever you can to expose the rise of the Nazi Party or the atrocities that the Nazi Party is carrying out. It has a very interesting sort of art style, a lot of black and white. One of the things I really like in some of the imagery that you see is people are black and white, but their eyes have color. And I think it tries to drive home this artistic idea of an individual person, of an individual soul behind this shade of gray and everything else. And I think that's pretty interesting. You obviously, as the leader of this group, there's some element of responsibility. You could get your people killed. You obviously don't want to do that. As I said, you do things like dropping leaflets to spread awareness about what the Nazis are doing. You might paint graffiti on walls to try and, again, call out or speak out against the Nazis. There's elements of sabotage, intelligence gathering activities, recruiting activities, all while trying to stay undercover and hidden from the Nazis. And I haven't seen a lot else other than this. I mean, there's interrogation scenes, there's dialogue and choices that you have to make. I think this is a very interesting looking game. I don't have a lot else to say about it other than I think it's a game that I'm going to be paying very close attention to. It's a game that's scheduled to come out on January 30th of this year, so just a couple of weeks. And I think this is certainly something worth keeping an eye on because I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like this before. I think we get kind of buried under the weight of ever more and more and more World War II games, but this is definitely different. And I think there's always room in gaming and strategy gaming to tell a familiar story, but from a very different lens. And too often, I think, in strategy and in war games, we see games about moving counters across maps, about blitzkrieg, about armored warfare, but we don't see the personal cost. We don't see the true human story behind all of this. And I think this is a real interesting opportunity to see that story told from the ground. And I'm really curious to see what they do with this. So I'm very excited about it. I'm looking forward to it. But that's about all I can really share at this time, and I'll definitely share it on the channel when it does come out. With that being said, that is my number 5 game on this list. It is Through the Darkest of Times, and it is coming out on January 30th. At number 4 is a game called The Berlin Wall. It's being developed by K202 and published by Playway. And this is a game, the year of 2020 might be the year of the Resistance Simulator. This is a game that takes place in Eastern Germany during the Cold War, with the ever-famous Berlin Wall dividing the city between totalitarian and communist East Berlin and sort of free democratic Western Berlin. And in this game, you are the leader of the leader of a resistance organization tasked with helping people get out of Eastern Berlin. So when the wall went up, many families were divided. Many people had part of their family in the west, part of the family in the east. They would want to try and get back to their people, or maybe they just wanted to get away from the sort of the dictatorship in the east, or maybe they had other pressing reasons that they needed to get out of the east. Whatever the reason, the game is putting you in charge of helping people get across the wall. And obviously, given that it's a wall, and given that it's the Berlin Wall, you can't just go straight across, no man's land. You'll get shot. And so this is a strategy game that allows you to sort of experience the DDR, experience Eastern Germany, while also, attempting to help people escape from it. It could be a little bit like Papers, Please, but instead of being the border guard, you're the people trying to escape through the border. It looks like there's images of people going under the wall, people trying to sneak across the wall. There's guards, there's dogs, there's towers. And so this is, I think, a really interesting game that it claims to have an engaging story with intense and challenging gameplay. There's a little bit of retro style sort of imagery and graphics, if you will. It definitely looks gringy. It looks like the Cold War. And I think this is a really intriguing game. My dad was actually stationed in Germany in 1968, so after the wall was already up. He was based in Frankfurt with the U.S. Army, but he was a military police and an officer in the military police, and the unit that he was commanding was actually in charge of security in Checkpoint Charlie. So while his headquarters was in Frankfurt, he did have to go to Berlin on a couple of occasions to see the detachments of his men that were manning the checkpoint in Berlin, known as Checkpoint Charlie, which was sort of a crossing point between the wall, between the East and the West. And, he talked about seeing, Eastern German guards, through binoculars in the towers and whatnot. And I think for that reason, this is an intriguing game for me. And for a lot of other reasons, I think this is just, it's a sort of a quasi-stealth type of a game. You apparently meet and lead 3 characters, each with his or her own story, serving as game protagonists. It's up to you to decide whether to get involved with people around you, to look for allies, or just keep your head down and assault the wall. But whatever you do, remember there will be consequences, whether you like it or not. There's apparently 2 phases. There's sort of a planning phase where you plan your operation, and then there's an action phase where you actually act out the attempt to escape. There is it looks like you make calls, you send letters, you craft, hire people, all sorts of things to try and prepare your scheme. In the second phase, when you actually go and try and get through the wall, you talk to people, ask them for help, bribe them, trick them, more crafting, stealing things, buying things, anything you can do to escape the wall, be it climb the wall, dig under the wall, whatever it takes. And so I think this is a really interesting looking game. I don't know a lot else about it other than that. I've seen some screenshots. I've sort of read through the Steam page. I've read a little bit of that here as I'm kind of talking to you about it. And I think it's a different game that could, both immerse you in the Cold War while also being an interesting, challenging kind of a stealth game. And that's kind of all I have to say about it. So number 4 on my list is a game called The Berlin Wall, and it is slated to come out sometime in 2020. I don't have any other information other than that. At number 3 on my list is a game that I don't really have much at all to share with you, but I do know it is supposed to come out this year, and I'm really excited about it because it's a Gary Grigsby game. And that is War in the East 2. It is published by Slytherin and Matrix Games. It's being made by 2x3 Games. War in the East 2 is the sequel to War in the East, which was itself a modern remake of Gary Grigsby's War in Russia, which came out in 93, and actually I think originally in 86 or 84, somewhere around there. And this is a granddaddy of a game. So I haven't played much War in the East, or War in the East 1, but I have played a lot of Gary Grigsby's War in the Pacific on my channel. So if you think about it, War in the East is really a slightly streamlined version of that. War in the East and War in the West, which came out in 2014, are grand war games that look at the Eastern and the Western fronts. War in the East 1 starts in 1941 with the German invasion of Russia, carries through to the conclusion of the war. War in the West starts in, I think, 43 and carries through on the Western front of the war. And these are basically games like War in the Pacific, but they are focused on land and air combat. There's basically no naval combat in these games. And they fight the war out in a massive scale. It's a little bit streamlined. I think turns are a week instead of day-long turns, but it has all the same level of detail that you would expect, down to, you're looking at division-size units on a scale where there were literally hundreds upon hundreds of divisions on the German army and in the Soviet army. You're looking at massive maneuvers, be it the operations against Stalingrad or Kursk. You are looking at war at a scale which the world has thankfully never seen since, and it is something that's truly impressive in a game of this scope and this detail. And they haven't really released any screenshots for this yet, so everything you're seeing here is from War in the East 1. But this is, I think, anytime Gary Grigsby releases a new game, it's definitely something that kind of makes your ears perk up and makes you take note, and that by itself is enough reason for me to be interested in it. I don't want to talk your ear off about it too much more than that. I don't know a lot about it other than they've said they're finishing it up and they anticipate it coming out this year. So, we'll see what comes of this, but I I sorry guys, I don't have anything else to say other than War in the East 2 is supposed to be coming out this year. It's a sequel to War in the East 1. It's made by 2x3 Games. It's published by Matrix and Slytherin Games, and that's enough to know that I'm excited about it and really looking forward to checking it out. At number 2 for my most anticipated games of 2020 is a game that I do have a couple of screenshots for, but it's another game that I don't know a ton about, and it's called Distant Worlds 2. I believe it's still being developed by Codeforce, who are the developers of Distant Worlds 1, or Distant Worlds Universe. It is being published by Matrix and Slytherin Games. It's a game that's been in development for over 4 years. If you're not familiar with Distant Worlds 1, it's basically a real-time sort of space 4X strategy game, but think of something like Stellaris, which is made by Paradox, but if you added a lot of detail, if you added, civilian ships, if you made the universes much larger, it allowed for literally like 700, 900 plus star systems, thousands upon thousands of ships, not just military ships, but civilian ships, full-on economies, a much more robust AI, the ability to simulate things down to an individual ship level where if you want, you could play the game as an individual captain, or if you wanted, you could play the game as a emperor of an entire, empire. The ability to leave a lot of decisions to the AI. In Distant Worlds, the economy can largely be run by itself, and you can really take on this sort of hierarchical role of leader of the country, but you're not bothering yourself with the minutia of running the economy on a day-to-day level. It is a living, breathing world, a living, breathing universe that is truly epic in scope and scale, and is probably the biggest of any of the 4X space strategy games ever to be made. Distant Worlds 1 was originally in 2D, so the idea behind Distant Worlds 2, and I'm taking this straight from sort of a write-up by the developers, is our general idea, our general goal for Distant Worlds 2 is to make a better Distant Worlds 1. A new and modern engine. This is a game that's like over 10 years old, so obviously Distant Worlds 2 will be a new and modern engine. They are going to bring the game into 3D, so Distant Worlds 2 was in 2D, or sorry, Distant Worlds 1 was in 2D. They're going to bring everything into 2D, multi-core support, 64-bit support, and gives you a lot of, even bigger galaxies than what they had before. I'm hoping they don't lose the sort of the charm and the detail that they had previously, but if you were kind of thinking about like what Distant Worlds is, it would kind of be a cross between, as I said, Stellaris, and for those of you who are familiar, a very deep sort of space simulation called Aurora 4X, which is very short on the visuals, but is one of those types of games that, like, hey, if you forget to put this single component on your ship, it'll fall apart. And there's no protection for an individual user in a game like that from their own incompetence and their own, idiocy. There are a couple of things that they call out in this write-up here. It looks like ships are divided into three-dimensional models, as I said previously. Ships have a hull, which is something I guess they didn't have before, with armor rating, the ability to take damage, as well as additional space that can fit different components. You can put components on like shields, armor, different things like that. So basically you have the ability to design your own ships. As I said, there's sort of a civilian economy aspect to this, as well as sort of the military aspect of this. One of the complaints I would have with Stellaris is that it's just a little bit too simplified, and this definitely digs into a lot more of the detail of that. But I don't have a lot of other additional information other than to say that it's the sequel to Distant Worlds 1, and I'm really curious to see what all comes of this. Most of the screenshots they've shared have been sort of tailored to the ship design element of it, so obviously there's a lot of questions and a lot of unknowns, but to know that it's being developed, to know that they've, after 4+ years of development, they finally started sharing screenshots, developers finally started posting things like developer diaries and things like that, or at least write-ups about ship design. That's about all I need to know to be really excited about this. I did a Let's Play series, a collaboration series that in many ways was sort of the impetus for the eventual Rule the Waves collaboration series for Distant Worlds back in the day with some folks like, I think it was Das Tactic and maybe it was Larry Monty or something like that, where we kind of each took a period of time where we ruled an empire and then we handed it off to the next person who's the next head of state. And I think one of the things that really impressed me with Distant Worlds 1 was just the ability of the AI to run a competent empire on its own, and it really allowed you to kind of role play an individual role within an empire. You could be the head of state without being the micromanagey, control everything type of a figure that you have to be in a lot of these kind of games. And fleets would be deployed, they'd be built, ships would be built, commerce would occur, would move between systems, all without your direct input. So it really is sort of one of those unique games that really lets you feel like you're in you're in a time and place, and it's not you as sort of the all-knowing, all-seeing being in control of everything. But anyway, that's all I've got to say about Distant Worlds 2, a game that I'm very excited about that is hopefully going to be coming out in 2020. We don't have an official launch date or anything like that, but they've started talking about it and sharing screenshots, and that's enough for me to be excited. And at our number one slot for my most anticipated game of 2020 is a game that has been tentatively announced. There isn't a website for the developer. They do have a Facebook page. I haven't seen much in the way of information about this game, but the developer was on a live stream with Jive Turkey, who's a very large and well-regarded sort of simulation player who plays a lot of Cold Waters, plays a lot of DCS, some Command Modern Air Naval Operations. And the game that he was talking to the developer about is called Seapower, Naval Combat in the Missile Age. It is being developed by Jurassic Studios, I think it is, which is the sort of successor to Killerfish Games. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, Killerfish Games it's Jurassic Games. And Killerfish Games was the developer behind Cold Waters and Atlantic Fleet, two games that featured pretty prominently on this channel. Atlantic Fleet was a World War II game that took a lot from great naval battles of the North Atlantic, and it allowed you to fight through the sort of the commerce raiding campaign of the Germans in the Atlantic, the Battle of the Atlantic, in World War II. As either the British or the Germans. And as the Germans, you would send submarines and raiders out to sea to try and interdict convoys that were moving from the Americas to the British Isles in an effort to strangle the British. And as the British, you would obviously try to stop the Germans. And it had a full dynamic campaign as well as various individual surface or submarine engagements that you could play out. The fundamental problem with Atlantic Fleet is that it wasn't real time, so combat was very weird to have gunfights and turn-based setting, and the combat was interesting. The modeling and the campaign itself was very intriguing and I think well done, but the real weakness was the combat resolution. Despite it all being pretty and kind of interesting. Cold Waters was a sort of modern take on Red Storm Rising, which is sort of a submarine simulation game during a hypothetical Third World War, where you're in charge of an individual American submarine in either a 1968, 1982, 83 Cold War gone hot, or a more modern scenario in the South China Sea. And that was a game that was real-time combat, gorgeous 3D animation, submarine combat. It was a little bit silly and arcadey at times, where like you could juke and jink torpedoes coming in like a fighter jet. But outside of a couple of things like that, it was a true gem of a game and a lot of fun to play. The developers, Killerfish was the developer of that game, apparently has split up and is no longer a thing. So unfortunately, there will be no further Killerfish games. But two of the individuals, is my understanding based off of this Jive Turkey stream, two of the individuals from Killerfish have formed their own new studio called Jurassic Games, and they are making this game called Seapower, Naval Combat in the Missile Age. On this stream and I'll link the stream in the description. On the stream, the developer was talking about how, in many ways, this is a sort of modern take on a game called Strike Fleet, which I think was done by Lucasfilms. I never played, or Lucas Games. I never played that. But they're also saying it's very similar to games like Fleet Command, Jane's Fleet Command, which is a fully rendered 3D naval simulation game with modern weaponry. So, SM-2 surface-to-air missiles, or Tomahawk land attack missiles, or fighter jets, going off the deck of an aircraft carrier. And we don't know a ton about the game yet, but they did have like a 40-minute discussion about it. The imagery and the artwork looks a lot like Cold Waters, so I'm wondering if they're sharing or reusing some of the assets from Cold Waters. The developer did say it will have a fully dynamic campaign. It will take place in the Atlantic, so the entire Atlantic Ocean is modeled. They also said the Persian Gulf is modeled. So a dynamic campaign, Atlantic and the Persian Gulf. Probably it sounds like one campaign, maybe two, but probably one. It also sounds like they have a desire to have individual battle scenarios, or at least a random battle generator, which is something that Cold Waters didn't have, I don't think, but was something that was in Atlantic Fleet. It sounds like they really kind of want to go back to some of the elements that they had in Atlantic Fleet, although obviously with the caveat that it's going to be real-time combat. They're going to have air-to-air being modeled. You can see in some of the screenshots here that they're going to have aircraft are obviously a big part of the missile age. So in many ways, it's like, in my mind, it's like if they made Red Storm Rising, but instead of making, like with Cold Waters where they modeled the game after the video game Red Storm Rising, which was a Tom Clancy novel, if they basically said, hey, we're going to do the actual book Red Storm Rising and allow you to simulate through these naval engagements that are occurring, carrier battle groups moving across the Atlantic, potentially convoys that you have to protect, obviously still having submarines as a major aspect of this war. I mean, we don't know a ton about the game other than to say that this looks gorgeous. The idea is for it to be Strike Fleet and Fleet Command. Air combat's going to be a big thing. Apparently, you're able to jump into individual aircraft and command them, or jump out to individual ships and command them. I don't know if it'll be like an actual flight sim model or if it'll just be sort of like a 3D sort of a simulation like Cold Waters has. But in any event, I'm really excited about this. I think this is a phenomenal, announcement that they're working on this game. The fact that two of the three folks that are working on it are from, I think two of the three are from Killerfish. Maybe even all three, but I think they said two of the three are with Killerfish. Or were with Killerfish, is, they've got a proven track record of success, of really compelling and interesting games. This could be like a 3D, slightly more narrowly focused game that kind of, if you played Command Modern Air Naval Operations, but maybe you wanted something a little bit more approachable, a little bit more arcadey with like a fully 3D, rendered world. This might be the kind of game that's for you, and I'm really intrigued to see this. It sounds like they're redoing some of the user interface, but honestly, just go check the video out, go check the stream out that Jive Turkey had, and check it out there, because I listening to that, I'm super excited about it, but I'm not going to repeat 50 minutes worth of stuff here, so you should go check that out. Give Jive Turkey a follow too. He's a great follow. He's a former submariner, really knowledgeable. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to kind of just wrap that up with Seapower. That's my most anticipated game of 2020, assuming it comes out this year. It sounds like it's still a ways away, so if it comes out this year, it'll be late 2020. But those are the games I'm most excited about right now at this time, early in 2020, that we're talking about that could be coming out in 2020 or that have been recently announced for 2020. That's what I've got for you. Let me know in the description below, guys, if these are games you're excited about. Let me know if there's games I didn't include in this list that you are excited about, because I think this is going to be a tremendous year for both strategy and war games. I think these are 5 really interesting and appealing games that are on the verge of coming out, or that will be coming out this year. And I don't have much else to say. So hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts below as always. And as always, this is the Historical Gamer saying once again, thank you for watching, and until next time, I'm out.